Hiya. Not great. Broken through, come up. I'm not jumping into anything. What I'm doing is fucking clearing my chart. Right, well, if we get above here, I will buy. If we get above resistance, I'll buy retest. Pull back. Yeah. Otherwise, I will sell. Hold on. No, you're getting tripped out now. We've just made a new high. Well, price is certainly doing its thing. What? Where is my history? Making new highs. You know what? I'm a bit tired. have a plan. I've got a plan.
$321 million at the box office. Django cost $100 million to make, brought in $426 million, almost $500 million at the box office. And it goes on and on and on. But this idea, like these are miniature businesses, right? And so everybody's like, you can't have John Travolta was, probably the most important, arguably the most important character in that movie. Maybe Samuel L. Jackson, in Pulp Fiction played the bigger role. But that $8 million, and it yielded $213 million at the box office. The movie's been out for 25, 30 years. How much money has it made since? Okay, so there's one more story that I'm going to tell you. It's about Quentin Tarantino's favorite film critic, and I think it ties
Just
a lot
shush.
of...
I'm not there yet. What is my plan? I'm planning here. I'm in a trend. Uptrend. Uptrend. You can come to here or you can come to here. I mean, more than likely you're going to come to here. In a recent uptrend, so I'm following it. So I'm waiting for the pullback and then I will buy it. And I ideally want a goddamn something I can justify when it comes to the reversal candle. And I need a specific, I need pullback. This is looking clean, Okay, that's my plan.
Ideas that I took away from studying Tarantino. One is that if you love your work, that will increase your enjoyment of your life. Number two is the importance of knowing more about your industry than anyone else. Number three is that passion and enthusiasm is infectious. I've never seen, these are movies that came out 50 years ago in some cases. I've never seen them. And you're just reading about Tarantino's interpretation of them and love of them makes you love them or his enthusiasm.
Okay. Not much of a pullback, is it? It's nothing. Out. No. Just wait for it to get to your fucking area. And what is wrong? What? Fucking price. Right, no, no. I'm tired. That silly. It's just. It is in an uptrend. I missed that. I should have bought that. Yeah, just I wasn't sure. It's annoying me. Oh, for goodness sake. It's okay. Right, you missed the trade. Fuck's sake. Right, wait. What am I doing? Right. Oh dear. Not looking good. I need to fucking relax. Hold on. I might be alright. I'll even get another crack at this. just wrong. Right, hold on. Fine. Okay. I'm being a bit hectic, so just bear with me. What are we doing? I'm chasing now, aren't I? One, two, three, four. Why have I just done that? Why have I just done that? I don't know. I'm trying to make up money that I've lost. What am I fucking doing? Oh my god. I deserve to fucking lose this money. Because I'm being an absolute fucking idiot. Okay, good. Fucking hell, mate. What are you doing? That's 3%. You just fucking... What is your plan? Because that's not fucking it. Oh, God. Just fucking stop. What am I doing? You're really fucking stupid of me. I know. Why won't you let me? This is why I'm fucking in this situation, man. This is all I'm doing because fucking hell, I've been really silly.
For them. And then 4, the importance of building this historical database that you can then use and that can influence and benefit your work many, many years into the future. We have no idea, as we're about to see here. There's going to be examples of books you read, hopefully podcasts you listen to like this one, where you're going to hear something and you're going to use that 10, 15, 20 years into the future. And so he starts out comparing and contrasting the way that Kevin Thomas approaches his work is the direct opposite of how most people approach theirs in the same industry. Most critics writing for newspapers and magazines set themselves up as superior to the films that they were paid to review, which I could never understand, because judging from their writing, this was clearly not the case. They looked down on films they gave pleasure, and on filmmakers who had an understanding of the audience that they did not. As a kid who loved movies and paid to see pretty much everything, I just thought they were snide assholes. Today, as a much older and wiser man, I realize the extent of how unhappy they must have been. They wrote with the demeanor of somebody who hates their life and hates their job. Kevin Thomas reviewed movies for the Los Angeles Times. The LA Times was the morning newspaper that most agents and studio executives read. So it's influential not only to a young Quentin Tarantino, but also people working in the industry, a decade before, maybe half a decade before Tarantino breaks in. Years later, at the Torrance Public Library, I looked up one of his reviews. Okay, if you find yourself at a public library looking for a review of a movie that came out 20 years earlier, that is a sign that you're obsessed. That is a sign that you have maneuvered yourself into the exact industry you should be working in. And so he talks about the fact that Kevin loved, he was very passionate, again, passion and enthusiasm is infectious, that Kevin loved the movie for the review that he's reading. Quentin goes to watch it. He says, after 20 minutes, I walked out on this one too. But I never begrudged Kevin Thomas his enthusiasm. Did I waste money? Yeah, but I'm not going to pretend I even gave a shit about that. I liked Kevin Thomas so much, I was glad that he at least had a good time. Think about the contrast, right, where he started this, where he's like, I'm reading these critics for newspapers. Oh, and then you realize, they hate their lives, they hate their jobs. And then he's reading Kevin Thomas. Kevin's like hyped up about this movie. Quentin, who loves movies, goes to see it. He's like, I didn't like this movie, but I'm still happy because at least Kevin loved it. passion and enthusiasm is infectious. And so what's never stated, but it's also implied if you read the story, is like, oh, Kevin was just like Quentin in the sense that he maneuvered himself into a job he loved, which then increases your enjoyment of overall your life, right? Then he goes into this importance of having this historical database in your head because you never know when you're going to use these ideas. And so here's an example of that. One review Kevin Thomas wrote in 1980 that I read when I was 18 years old was to have a significant impact on my film 17 years later. So it was a review. This is so he's 18. He's gonna use this 17 years later, right? It was a review for a Jaws ripoff called Alligator. In his review of this giant alligator movie, okay, which Kevin called well made and lots of fun, Kevin focused on two lead performances. One of those lead performances was a young Robert Forster. Remember, Quentin is 18 years old when he's reading this review about this performance of this actor named Robert Forster. 15 years later, when I was writing my adaptation to what would turn into the movie Jackie Brown, I had to consider who was going to play the likable lead male character, bail bondsman Max Cherry. There was something about Forster in Alligator that really stuck with me. I watched the movie again, and I felt that the character from Alligator could be Max Cherry.
Why have I done this? Why have I done... Nope. Fuck's sake. Please fucking no. Oh my god. Please. Everyone fancy stepping in? Nice, done.
Incoming mail.
What am I doing? Don't have to guess.
years earlier. So I started writing the script as if he was. Would I have done that without Kevin Thomas's highlighting Forrester so positively in his review? No. In the end, what made Kevin Thomas so unique in the world of the 70s and 80s film criticism, he seemed like one of the only few practitioners who truly enjoyed their job and consequently their life. I loved reading him growing up and practically considered him a friend. In 1994, I won an award for Pulp Fiction from the Los Angeles Film Critics Association. When I stepped up to the podium and looked out before the audience of LA critics, my first remarks to the room were, "Gee, thanks. Now I finally know what Kevin Thomas looks like." And that is where I'll leave it for the full story. Highly recommend reading the book. You can buy the book, use it.
Hey, UK, I think we can all agree the internet is a double-edged sword. Sure, you've got unprecedented access to information, but it also has unprecedented access to you, your location, your purchases, your browsing history, and who knows what and is an after months.
I just went on this so-called manga.
Putting up the money, making sure everything runs on. I just re-listened to this entire episode. It's remarkable. Not only like the filmmaking genius that Spielberg is, but the way that he built his business and the way he thought about building the business around his life's work. And the reason I went back and re-listened to this, and the reason I originally did this episode almost 3 years ago, the reason I'm republishing it now, in case you missed it the first time, or even if you listened to it the first time, I highly encourage you to re-listen to it. You'll be surprised how much you're going to forget. But because I was working on the Tarantino episode last week, and he kept talking about multiple times in Tarantino's book, he's talking about the fact that he thought that Spielberg's natural-born filmmaker genius, that he's made some of the greatest movies that in film history. Tarantino would talk about Spielberg's gift of taking an idea they had in his mind and then making it real. And the other reason that I wanted to go back and study Spielberg is because in this episode, I talk about one of my favorite biographies of all time, which I covered 7 years ago on episode 35. And it was George Lucas, A Life by Brian Jane Jones. I have spent the whole week, I'm still in the process of rereading and really diving deep into George Lucas's life and work again. And so while I'm working on that, I think Spielberg is the perfect bridge from Tarantino to Lucas. Because if you study Spielberg, Lucas is going to play a role in his life, and if you study Lucas, Spielberg plays a role in his life. And what is fascinating is when you study all three, they have an idea that they have in common, right? And it's the fact that it talks about in this episode, it's talked about in the Tarantino episode, that we talked about in the Lucas episode. Spielberg in particular, he would watch and rewatch movies he loved. And then decades later, entire scenes from those movies would appear in Spielberg's own movies. That's this exact same thing as Edwin Land's ideas showing up in Steve Jobs' Companies and Products. It's the same thing as Sam Walton's ideas showing up in Jeff Bezos's Companies and Products. And a main theme that reappears for anybody who gets to the top of their profession, anybody who becomes great at what they do, is they are steeped in the industry, the history of their industry. They talk about over and over again. They don't just read a book one time. They don't just watch a movie one time. They don't just have one conversation. They do it over and over and over again. That is why, if you have not done so already, I'm going to highly recommend that you subscribe to Founders Notes. That's foundersnotes.com. You go to foundersnotes.com. That's founders with an S. For 6 years, I have been cataloging all my notes, my highlights, transcripts for every single episode, notes and highlights in every single book that I've done for the podcast. And now, by signing up for a subscription to Founders Notes, you get access to all my notes and highlights. You can search by keyword, by person, by subject. It's just a giant database on the collective knowledge of history-based entrepreneurs. You can also read all my highlights and notes by book. You can have all my notes and highlights presented to you in random order on the highlights feed feature. I've been searching by keyword, I've been rereading by highlights, and I've been rereading in random order on the highlights feed for years. I literally could not make the podcast without this tool. Now I've added a new feature that I'm super excited about. I can't stop talking about. It's actually called Sage. It is Founders Notes AI, and the name actually came from a Founders Notes subscriber because he heard all these names that I was trying to figure out what to name this feature. He's like, no, that doesn't describe what this feature actually does. And he's like, you should call it Sage because Sage is a profoundly wise person that is often looked to for guidance and advice. And so what Sage does, it's like search on steroids. You can ask it.
Shush. Right. I'm waiting for this pullback. This is a nice pullback now. This isn't.
It'll search every single note, every single highlight, every single transcript, and it'll start making connections. It's been making connections that I've even missed. And so as I was releasing this episode, I went to Founders Notes and I asked it, I was like, I asked Sage, what are the most important ideas to learn from Steven Spielberg? and then it gives an outline of the top 9, what it feels the top 9 ideas are most important to learn from Steven Spielberg. And the interesting part is if you press on expand, it actually tells you what it searched to come up with the answer. And it obviously it's going to search, the episode I did on Steven Spielberg. But then it searched when I mentioned Spielberg in a Steve Jobs episode, when I mentioned Spielberg in a Christopher Nolan and James Cameron episode, when I mentioned Spielberg in an episode on the creation of Pixar. And so I really believe a subscription to Founders Notes is the perfect companion if you're going to invest tens, dozens of hours, hundreds of hours of listening to Founders podcasts. It is the tool that will help you condense and clarify the collective knowledge of history's greatest founders so that you can use their ideas in your work. Highly recommend getting a subscription going to foundersnotes.com. That's founders with an S, foundersnotes.com. I appreciate the support, and I hope you enjoy this episode on Steven Spielberg. One of his boyhood friends recalls Spielberg saying he could envision himself going to the Academy Awards and accepting an Oscar and thanking the Academy. He was 12. I've been really serious about filmmaking as a career since I was 12 years old, Spielberg said. I don't excuse those early years as a hobby. Do you know what I'm saying? I really did start then. That was an excerpt from the book I'm going to talk about today, which is Steven Spielberg, A Biography, and it was written by Joseph McBride. And that is one of the reasons I wanted to read a biography of Spielberg, because I think it's so, there's a few reasons, but one of them is the fact that from the age of 12 to 17, which is how old he is today, he's had the same goal. He has been making movies for 62 years. It's very rare for somebody to do something for that long, for 62 years. So I think that's somebody that we should obviously be studying and learning from. Another reason that he came to my attention is because
I'm sorry, but what is going on?
he appears on the books that I've ever read for the podcast. That's back on Founders number 35, and that's the biography of George Lucas. It's called George Lucas, A Life. And George and Steven met when they were in their early 20s, and they became best friends and collaborators throughout their entire career. And actually, re-listened to that episode, and then I reread. I want to make sure I'm rereading my highlights from that book, from that George Lucas book every year, because I think what he did, his approach to filmmaking, that made him a multi-billionaire. There's a lot of ideas that he used. He just, in his work that we can use in ours, where he just approached the industry. He's like, well, he just kept asking why. Like, why are movies made this way? Why are they financed this way? Why are they owned this way? Why are they distributed this way? And he constantly questioned every aspect and realized, hey, I could come up with a better way to do things. My favorite sentence in that entire book, and that's another gigantic book, it's like 500 pages. It's George Lucas unapologetically invested in what he believed in most, himself. And we'll see today that Steven Spielberg did the exact. So for today's podcast, it took a really, really long time. This is a gigantic book. It's almost 500 pages. The author interviewed over 325 people that knew Steven Spielberg. It goes into amazing detail of all the movies he made. up until the end of the book. The book ends. He had just finished Schindler's List and Jurassic Park. He's just over 50 years old. And in addition to reading the book, I also watched and took notes on this documentary that's on HBO Max right now, which is serves as another biography of Steven Spielberg as well. It's 2.5 hours long. So between the book and watching the documentary and taking notes, it took me about 30 hours of prep work before I'm sitting down to talk to you about it. So I'm going to be working off my notes from the book and the notes from the documentary as well. Before I jump into the book, I want to tie something that's remarkable that maybe you knew this. It blew my mind when I found this out, because I'll tell you how Steven Spielberg reminds me of Coco Chanel. So a few months ago, I read the second biography of Coco Chanel that I've read. And she started off as an orphan, and then wound up, before she died, she was the richest woman in the world. And part of the way she got that way was because she signed one of the most lucrative deals in history. She previously made a mistake when she started her perfume company. She wound up giving away 90% of it. Didn't realize that Chanel No. 5 was going to be one of the most successfully commercial products ever made. And so, like 20 years later, she winds up redoing the deal, and she gets 2% of all sales globally for Chanel No. 5. That made her, in today's dollars, that means she made $300 million a year, and she had a clause in that deal where the company had to pay for every single one of her living expenses. So Spielberg has a very similar deal. I just found out, because I'm going to be reading a biography of Michael Jordan soon as well, that he has a deal like this. Michael Jordan gets 5% of all sales from his Jordan shoe brand. And he's estimated to make about $150 million a year in present day, because they're doing around $3 billion a year in sales. So Spielberg winds up, and this deal is done after the book ends, but he winds up signing a deal where he gets 2% of all the ticket revenue at Universal Studios, the theme parks. And so that's rumored to pay him out. Again, this is just from this one deal. It's rumored to pay him out about $50 to $75 million a year. They keep trying. Universal keeps trying to buy him out. They say, "Hey, we'll give you a couple billion just to buy you out of this contract," and he keeps saying no. And one of the reasons I think that he keeps saying no is because in that contract, it's not only the Universal theme park that's in Orlando, but it's any future theme park that they build. And I think they're making a new one in China and somewhere else. Can't remember the other destination, or the other place rather. But he's going to get 2% of all ticket sales on that. And the last time I looked, it was something like 10 to 12 million people a year buy tickets to just their Universal theme park in Orlando. And for some reason, when I was reading about that, an idea or quote from the founder of Shopify, Toby Luque, popped into my mind. And he says, you have to remember that the world is non-linear. Spielberg, had this passion for movies that started when he was 12 years old. He had no idea what opportunities him pursuing that passion over multiple decades could unlock in the future. Certainly couldn't have predicted that, hey, I can get 2% of all 2% of all tickets at Universal Studios, multiple decades in the future. So right when he's 16 years old, he had just made this movie. It's called Firelight. He winds up remaking this movie when he becomes a professional filmmaker. That's the movie. The remake of this movie is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But we see his personality at 16 years old, and a lot of this sticks with him for his life. He went by Steve Spielberg at this point in his career. Steve Spielberg had been shooting film obsessively for more than 7 years, with a maniacal dedication that made him virtually a
Just done the same fucking thing.
Oblivious to schoolwork, dating, sports, and other normal adolescent pursuits. So this idea of monomaniacal dedication is something that's going to appear over and over again in the book. It appears over and over again in the documentary as well. He repeats it over and over again. He's like, I had one focus. I was obsessed with movies. I knew right away that this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And as he says, now they're quoting him when he's reflecting back at this time as being a young man, a young filmmaker. I was more or less a boy with a passion for a hobby that grew out of control and somewhat consumed me. I discovered something I could do, and people would be interested in it and me. I knew that after my third or fourth little film, that this was going to be a career, not just a hobby. And that's another thing that just makes Spielberg extremely interesting. Like how many people realize from such a young age? Two people come to mind that were similar to Spielberg. Like, okay, I knew by the time I was a teenager what I was going to do for my life. Ingvar Kamprad, which is the founder of IKEA, I've covered him back on, I think, on Founders number 1 or 2. He started IKEA like 14 years old, worked on it till he died when he was in his 80s. And then Kobe Bryant knew from the time he was a teenager, he's like, okay, I want to be, my goal is to be the greatest basketball player of all time. So I think it's rare for anybody to find what they really want to do in life, but even more rare that you know from such a young age. It's just remarkable. So that's a little bit about the family life and the fact that he was really uncontrollable. He was a born director. I want you to see this. So his mom is talking. She said, "Our house was run like a studio. We really worked hard for him. Your life was not worth a dime if you didn't, because he nagged you like crazy. Stephen had this way of directing everything. Remember, he's 16 years old at the time. Not just his movies, his life. He directed our household. He was a terrible student in school, but I never thought what was going to become of him. His mom was so tolerant of her son's lack of interest in school that she often let him stay home, feigning illness so he could edit his movies." So there's a lot about like the uncertainty of her early family life that pops up in his movies. Talk about it at length in the documentary. It's covered over and over again in the book as well. His mom, he didn't really consider a mom. She was more like a friend. They basically had no rules. She wasn't interested in growing up. His parents wound up getting divorced, and I'll get into the bizarre story, just crazy story what his mom does. But then you have, so on one end you have his mom who's kind of like a friend, right? His dad is this really gifted engineer that is highly recruited by the major technology companies of his day. So they move around, from the East Coast to Phoenix to then he winds up in Silicon Valley. And his dad was a workaholic. So Steven winds up emulating his dad, but in Steven's movies, a lot of them has to do with like an absentee dad. So they wind up reconciling later on in life, but Steven had a really hard time with that. And Steven's dad also took a bad approach, in my opinion, a bad approach. We kind of tried to direct what his son was going to do with his life, force him into, hey, study math, then study engineering, be an engineer like me. And Steven he just wasn't interested in that. He wasn't interested in school. He knew, okay, I'm going to be a director. Not just I'm going to work in the film industry. I'm going to be a director. So he starts talking to his dad about wanting to be a director, and his dad tries to, what's the way to put this? He tries to make him think small. So you'll see what I mean right here. So he says, he said, I want to be a director. And I said, well, if you want to be a director, you got to start at the bottom. You got to be a gopher and work your way up. And he said, no, Dad, the first picture I do, I'm going to be a director. And he was. That blew my mind. That takes gut. And here's another quote from a young Steven Spielberg. Making movies grows on you. You can't shake it. I like directing movies above all. All I know for sure is I've gone too far to back out now. And so this idea there's no turning back, this obviously conflicts with a lot of conventional life advice, but it appears over and over again in these biographies. People are just like, I have no plan B. I'm all in on this idea. This is something he talks about in the book. Quote from the documentary. Says it there too. And now, the book ends. This book ends. He's just over 50 years old. The documentary takes place, he's in his early 70s, and he says, I realized there was no going back. This was going to be what I was going to do, or I was going to die trying. This was going to be the rest of my life. So a few pages later, there's two sentences, each on separate pages that I think are very interesting. Very quick lessons here. And one is that it's obvious Spielberg was one capable of independent thought, and part of that came out of the fact that he just felt like a misfit. He felt different than everybody else. He felt he wasn't understood. He was not interested in the other things that were expected of a kid, a young person his age. And he says, I never felt comfortable with myself because I was never part of the majority. I felt like an alien. Then he talks about his approach to filmmaking, which is very common for, I think, how you make a good product. The fact that you put yourself in the place of the customer. Like you make what you want to see. And so he says Spielberg wants to find his approach to filmmaking by declaring, I am the audience. Recently, it's the 10-year anniversary of Steve Jobs' death, and I was rereading some notes from this book about how they created the iPod. And Steve Jobs and his team at Apple said they knew that the iPod was going to be a success because they loved using it. And Spielberg has a similar approach. He's like, I make movies that I want to see. A trait that we see in his early life that he keeps up for the rest of his career. The book ends with Jurassic Park, with them discovering, oh my God, like he winds up trying to hire. He didn't know that CGI had advanced so much, right? That they could actually have the Velociraptors and Tyrannosaurus Rex look like they did in that movie. And so originally they were trying to physically make like these costumes that were going to have, whether they were machines or they had people dressed up as them trying to run and trying to emulate what wind up being reproduced by the computer in the movie. But from the very beginning, he was obsessed with finding the latest cutting edge technology that he could apply to his craft. This is something that's very important. And really, the way to think about technology is not just computers. This technology is just a better way to do something, right? And you should invest in it because the savings compound. The money he saved, instead of having 30 or 50 different people running around, think about all the people that had to make the steel, the plastic, the materials that the dinosaurs had to be made out of, could all be replaced by software. And Jurassic Park winds up being one of the most profitable movies. I think he made like $250 million. He's probably made more since then, in the 20 years since then, just off that movie. It's just remarkable. And part of that was investing in technology. Invest in technology savings compound. Steven's fascination with all kinds of cutting-edge technology and his mastery of the tools of filmmaking have been evident from the earliest days of his professional career. And there's actually a scene, I'm getting ahead of myself, but there's a scene in that documentary where Steven goes up to Industrial Light and Magic, which is George Lucas's special effects company. And they created the CGI for I think it was the Tyrannosaurus Rex running, if I remember the scene correctly. And they just could not believe what they were seeing on the computer screen. They compared that moment, right, that was taking place at Industrial Light and Magic to when sound was first introduced to movies. That the fact that they said it opened up a whole new way. If you could imagine it, you could do it. You weren't limited to plastic or steel. Another thing from his early childhood, and then I want to get into how he breaks into the industry, because there's a lot of interesting lessons. I think quotes that I've read in all the books that I've covered for this podcast comes from Yvon Chouinard in his book, Let My People Go Surfing. And he says one of his favorite things about entrepreneurship is, if you want to understand the entrepreneur, study the juvenile delinquent. The delinquent is saying with his actions, this sucks. I'm going to do my own thing. And Yvonne's like, that's how I approach my work. Steven was very much the same way, but he was like a bad little devil since he was a little kid. And this is his aunt talking about that. It's like, we have a word for him in Yiddish. We call him a mazik. It's said lovingly, but it means a mischievous little devil. And he was that. Okay, so this is a little bit at the very beginning. How did he becomes the youngest director ever signed? He's very much like a prodigy, like a wonder kid. So main theme in Spielberg's work, singular focus, which I'll repeat over and over again today, and enthusiasm attracts mentors. And it is extremely important, especially when he was a 20-year-old kid, 21-year-old kid, 22-year-old kid. Even in his early 30s, he's constantly, when he's already successful, constantly seeking out older, wiser people that can help. And one thing that they're attracted in return to him is because he gives a damn. He clearly has soul in the game. His enthusiasm, and you and I talked about this on the podcast earlier, passion is infectious. We just respond to it. And so you see the mentors found his passion and his enthusiasm for film, and like, wow, okay, I want to help this kid as much as I can. So it says he cares about one thing, making films. Spielberg was a genuine, before I read the sentence to you, another note off myself on the page. You can change an existing industry. Lucas and Spielberg did. And so this is a description. When they come in, the golden age of Hollywood is over. And now, in large part to Lucas, Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Brian De Palma, all of which are friends, which is one of the most amazing things about this book and about the documentary as well. Because you have all these young filmmakers that came at an existing
rough day. Do you know what? I think it really might sell off. But any confirmation of that? Eight 839. It's all good. It's a nice trade. I keep going against fucking... Fuck that. What am I doing? What? Just fuck off. I'm being ridiculous. Fuck. Fuck. sake. Cheers.